Welcome to the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research. My name is Julia Rothkopf, and I'm the Program Associate at YIVO. Today, translator Sandra Chiritescu and preface writer Malena Chinski join us to talk about the English translation of Malka Owsiany Recounts, A Chronicle of Our Time by Mark Turkow, in a discussion led by Rachelle Grossman. For those of you who do not know YIVO, we are a very special place for the celebration, contemplation, and exploration of Yiddish and Eastern European Jewish culture. We are located in New York City, where our library and archive contain over 24 million documents and 400,000 books, which are used by researchers from all around the world. We also have lots of classes on Yiddish language and culture, exhibitions, and public programs just like this one, where we aim to bridge the worlds of Jewish culture and our vast collections. So thank you all for joining us today. This book is available in the YIVO store. My colleague Flora will put a link in the chat to purchase it. And briefly, I just want to introduce our speakers before we get started. So Sandra Chiritescu is Clinical Assistant Professor of Yiddish at New York University. She's previously taught Yiddish at Columbia and the Worker Circle. She holds a BA in German philology from the University of Zurich and a PhD in Yiddish Studies from Columbia. Her dissertation, Bubbes, Mames and Daughters, Uncovering 20th and 21st Century American Jewish and American Yiddish Feminist Genealogies, brings together her research interests in Yiddish literature and culture, American Jewish literature, feminist and queer theory, and translation theory. And Malena Chinski's research focuses on Shoah commemoration and post-war Yiddish culture, particularly in Buenos Aires and Paris. She's published widely in co-edited Splendor, Decline, and Rediscovery of Yiddish in Latin America, published by Brill in 2018. And she also learned Yiddish at the YIVO Foundation of Buenos Aires and teaches Yiddish through YIVO in New York. And Rachelle Grossman is Assistant Professor of Comparative Literature at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her work focuses on the intersection of Yiddish and its transnational connections with other literatures, languages, and cultures. In her research, she develops a geopolitical approach to literature, focusing especially on the transformation of literary centers and peripheries in the post-war period. She is also interested in technologies of print and how they impact literature as material culture. So thank you all for joining, and we will get started.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you everybody for being here. Malena Chinski, Sandra Chiritescu. It's so wonderful to be in conversation with you, lovely colleagues, especially on the occasion of the publication of this new and wonderful translation, Malka Owsiany Recounts. And so today I am going to be a host to take us through a lovely conversation about this book and its context, its publication. I'm going to share my screen here so that we can see some images. I hope that you can see. This is just for the sake of the introduction here. I'd also like to welcome Rosa Nierenberg, Malka's daughter, and other family members who are in attendance today. I'd really like to thank Rosa for bringing this new translation to light, and if you're up for it, at the end of our discussion, we invite you to share a few words. I am going to give a brief introduction about Malka and her life. Then Sandra is going to give us a little bit of a synopsis of the plot of this book, and then we're going to have a conversation about it. So while I do that, I also am going to show some pictures, most of which can be found in this new edition, which really add to our understanding of the story and of this important person. So I want to share here that Malka Owsiany, later Nierenberg, she was born in 1925 in Raków, which is a town in Poland near Kielce. Her father and her two siblings immigrated to Argentina before World War II, which is important, of course, for her post-war story. Malena has written about Malka Owsiany's life, and she has written that the book follows Owsiany from her childhood years in Raków through expulsions, hiding in the woods, loss of relatives, deportations, captivity in Kielce, in Auschwitz, in Ravensbrück, up to her liberation in 1945. And I will add that Malka Owsiany was sent as a refugee to Sweden before she immigrated to Buenos Aires, where she was reunited with her family. And this story was published in book form in Yiddish in 1946. It is one of the earliest examples of Holocaust literature that would become, as we know now, quite a large and very important genre. In 1946, of course, this was just the beginning of this process of thinking about how to tell stories about what had happened to people in the Holocaust. And her book was published, as I said, in in Yiddish in 1946. It was translated into Spanish in 2001, and now for the first time into English. And we can see these are some of the covers of these different editions in Yiddish with this illustration and this black and red text. In Spanish, we have images of Malka at different times of her life, and this Arbeit macht frei, we have different images of Holocaust memory that we associate with that. And this new edition here, where she's waving from this image here from the newsreel when she arrived in Sweden. And I'm going to turn things over to Sandra here to give us a short synopsis of the book. And then I'm going to ask Sandra and Malena some questions to put us all in conversation about its reception and more. And again, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to our conversation. So, Sandra, could you tell us a bit more about Malka Owsiany's story?
Hi everyone. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Eva, for hosting. And of course, also thank you, Rosa, Nierenberg, and the other members of the family for bringing this English translation out. I'll be giving, like Rachelle said, I'll be giving a kind of a brief synopsis, and I've just used images of maps to kind of pinpoint us in the geography of where this narrative takes us. So, as Rachelle was explaining, right, this is a piece of Holocaust testimony, so it focuses almost exclusively on the kind of 1939 to 1945 period of Malka's life under Nazi rule, which that maps onto the years of being 14 to 20 years old for her. So she was a teenager for the duration of the Holocaust. And she was born and lived in Rakov, which we can see here right in the bottom right corner. It is relatively close to the bigger city of Kielce, where she was later in a labor camp. And there's kind of a little bit of mention in her testimony of kind of pre-war life in Rakov. She also really gets into kind of the details of Polish-Jewish relations and what those were like, both kind of leading up to the Holocaust and then during the Holocaust. And I think Malena kind of gets a little bit more into that in her preface, and maybe she'll want to say a little bit more about the depiction of Polish-Jewish relations in this testimony. And then, yeah, so as we also heard earlier, right, Malena was also, as the Nazis occupied Poland, Malka, sorry, not Malena, Malka was first kind of hiding out in the forests, and then eventually was captured and ended up doing heavy labor in and around the Kielce labor camp. Before her next station being in, I think that's our next image, being in Auschwitz. Yes, right in here, right, we see kind of the location of Auschwitz between the larger Polish cities Katowice and Krakow. So that was kind of her intermediary station. And of course, right, there are numerous testimonies that depict life in Auschwitz, but I would say Malka's is certainly among the very first, and also among probably the first kind of testimony of a woman describing what it was like to be in prison in Auschwitz. So certainly an important historical document in that respect. And then from Auschwitz, Malka actually was taken to Ravensbrück, a rather different camp. And we see here, right, Ravensbrück is outside Berlin. What you see here at the bottom with some of my personal pins on Google Maps is Berlin. So Ravensbrück was a labor camp outside Berlin. It was a women's camp. It also included a large number of non-Jewish prisoners. And there, Malka was also roped once again into doing a type of ammunition work, kind of a type of factory and ammunition work, which she had some experience with from her earlier labor work in and around Kielce. So, and in some ways, that was her good, in air quotes, of course, her good fortune because it allowed her to remain working and remain, again, in air quotes, kind of useful. And she gets into more details about that in the later chapters. And then post-liberation, as we also saw already earlier, Malka was ended up first in Malmö, right? Kind of we see here, right? This is at the kind of close to Denmark, actually. It's at the southern edge of Sweden, where she kind of spent a brief couple of months, I think, before ultimately emigrating to Buenos Aires, which was kind of the final the last destination for her, where she rejoined a number of her family members, and kind of began her post-war life, which is also where she encountered Mark Turkow, who took her testimony. And I think, again, Malena will have a little bit more to say about the relationship between Mark Turkow and Malka, and how he came to take down her testimony and publish it. Um, does that sound good, Rachelle?
Yes, that's wonderful, and it's a great introduction to the story that we want to discuss together. And I remember you gave us an excerpt here. Did you want to talk about this
Yeah.
excerpt from the book?
This is an excerpt from the very last chapter, which is kind of an epilogue by Mark Turkow. And I picked this excerpt, right, and we have here both the Yiddish and English. I picked it because I think it tells us a little bit about kind of this very interesting relationship between Mark Turkow and Malka, which I think we'll be discussing in a little more detail later. And like, right, because the question, right, we always have questions, right? The questions we always have about Holocaust testimonies, how is the testimony taken down? What is left unsaid? What is said? What kind of mediating effect does an interviewer have, for example, if we're thinking of the kind of our large archives of video testimonies starting in the 80s and 90s in the US. But I'll just read the English here, which says that Malka Owsiany did not tell me everything she saw and experienced. It was simply impossible to do so. And I did not include everything Malka Owsiany told me. It was also impossible to do so. Not only because describing all details would have taken several volumes, but simply because I had to control my nerves in order to listen to everything calmly so that I would be able to describe it. I took notes only on the most important things, only the most vivid, in order to be able to comprehend at least partially how terribly the people were tortured and how much strength they needed to endure it all. It is interesting that in the most hopeless moment of their bitter fate, these tortured people sought to strengthen themselves spiritually through writing poetry, as if they wanted thereby to ease their heavy hearts, express their protest through poetry, their will to fight. They strengthened their rebellious souls through poems. These creations, whose authors were often unknown, are beginning to occupy an important place in Jewish and general literary scholarship. So in this second paragraph here, right, we see how Mark Turkow shifts away from the question of kind of, what does and doesn't end up in a piece of Holocaust testimony, and he actually shifts away from the genre of maybe more tightly circumscribed genre of testimony to the genre of poetry. And he actually includes a little poem towards the end of his epilogue. And I think, right, this kind of brings us to this question, right? We have Holocaust testimony can take so many different forms, right? We have these types of testimonies, as we see from Malka. We have these large video archives from, let's say, Fortunov and USC Shoah Foundation, which, again, I think Malka actually participated in. And then, of course, we also have literature created during and after the Holocaust, more or less fictionalized to various degrees. So really, together, all of these forms of testimony are what inform us about the Holocaust.
Malena, I'm wondering if you might tell us a little bit about Mark Turkow and why he was involved with Malka Owsiany's story.
Sure. So Mark Turkow was first he's known as part of the Turkow family. When we look up who Mark Turkow was, this is the first thing that comes up. A family of Warsaw Jewish intellectuals and artists, cinema, film and theater artists. and community activist. And Mark Turkow was a journalist who worked at Der Moment in Warsaw, and he wrote several travelogues, so chronicle of his travels, with an intention of advocating Jewish immigration from Poland. As part of this, of his travels, he spent some time in the Jewish colonies in Argentina, and he published a travelogue of this travel in 1939, and this was the year where he emigrated as well to Argentina. He settled in Argentina. And there he became a very strong figure, an important community activist, both in the realm of the Polish Vereinen, the immigrant societies, and also international Jewish organizations. So when Malka Owsiany came to Argentina, he was already the president of the Zentralverband von Polnische Juden in Argentina, the Central Union of Polish Jews in Argentina. So this organization gathered many different immigrant societies of Polish Jewish origin, and we can ask ourselves why the arrival of Malka Owsiany had such a visibility, which many other survivors didn't get. And this is probably due to different factors, and why Mark Turkow got interested in her. On one hand, we have to mention that her early arrival, because most of the Jewish survivors began arriving in the 50s. Second, we must mention that Malka Owsiany immigrated legally to Argentina with a visa, whereas most of the survivors entered clandestinely in Argentina. So you wouldn't make a big noise out of it in the press. And then a third, and most importantly, she was a Polish Jewish woman. This is a Polish Jew. And for the Polish Jews living in Argentina in the interwar years, this was a turning point, the arrival of the first Polish Jewish survivors. There were a few other survivors already in the country. There are some traces of this, but she was deemed as the first, and this is probably because of her Polish Jewish origin. So Mark Turkow, as a president of the Zentralverband, he approached Malka Owsiany in order to interview her and to publish her testimony, first in the press, serialized in the press, and then as a book. And here in the two images that are on the screen, on one hand the exceptional fact of announcing on the front page of the Die Presse, one of the two Yiddish dailies in Argentina, the arrival of Malka Owsiany in Montevideo, 2 days after her departure from Sweden. Es kommt a geratevet Yiddish Mädel. The word geratevet is used, which was usually in that period to call rescued to the survivors. And this is something that wouldn't happen later on, to have a front page announcing the arrival of a survivor. And the other image is only 12 days after her arrival, Malka Owsiany was invited to take part in a large ally in the Luna Park Stadium in Argentina, in Buenos Aires. It was not a ceremony dedicated to her in particular, but she was part of the speakers, and this was a fundraising ceremony in which she was introduced to the audience around between 12,000 and 15,000 people, and she was asked to say a few words. She didn't tell her story, but she introduced herself and in representation of the survivors in Europe, also because of fundraising purposes for the organizers. But this was the first time a survivor of the Holocaust faced the Argentine Jews who had been afar, had experienced war from afar, and who had very often lost their entire families.
Malena, could you tell us a little bit about Malka's trajectory from Ravensbrück to Buenos Aires? she stayed in Sweden, which is a story that I don't think is commonly known for this period. People talk about DP camps and that
Sure.
history, but that she was in Sweden seems to be pretty unique, or maybe it wasn't unique. Could you talk to us about that?
Sure. I mean, every experience is, of course, unique, but from a certain perspective, we can also say that her trajectory was common to thousands of people because Malka Owsiany was rescued within the framework of the White Buses Rescue Mission, which was organized in Sweden not long before the end of not long before German capitulation. The vice president of the Swedish Red Cross, the Count Folke Bernadotte, negotiated with a high SS leader in Germany for the liberation of a certain amount of prisoners who would be in principle Scandinavian prisoners in the concentration camps. This was in a context when it was clear that Germany would lose the war. So the Red Cross, the Swedish Red Cross, negotiated for these Scandinavian prisoners, but then this advanced and it ended up broadening the scope of the people who would be rescued, and it ended up including thousands of prisoners of other nationalities, and especially thousands of female prisoners from Ravensbrück, both Jewish and non-Jewish women who were imprisoned in Ravensbrück. And it is within this framework that Malka Owsiany saved her life. And this was the case of, it is estimated that around 15,000 people were saved in the White Buses Rescue Mission, and around 10,000 Jews found themselves in Sweden in 1945. So in this respect, it's not unique. And her itinerary from Ravensbrück to Malmo is also not unique. I mean, these people were evacuated in the so-called white buses. These were buses that had to be very well labeled because this was a context of Allied bombing of German cities, roads, and vehicles. And this is featured in the testimony in the moment when the buses leave the camp, and there's a moment of where they are attacked. The caravan is attacked. It is not clearly stated, but these were Allied bombs, because sometimes the messages didn't get to those who were supposed to not to attack certain vehicles and so on and so forth. So she left in a caravan with some 25 vehicles, crossing Nazi Germany up to the border, then crossing occupied Denmark, but still occupied, up until they were able to cross on a ship to Sweden. And they were received in Malmo. And as we see in the book cover, these were crowds of survivors. This was not only one. We see all these people, and also the arrival of the survivors was a very very strongly covered by the media in Sweden. This was they were very visible, and also the White Buses Rescue Mission was documented carefully by Sweden, because this for propaganda purposes, because countries were trying to build their post-war image as well. So that's why the rescue mission was so well documented, and that's why we have these wonderful pictures, like the one that comes from the newsreel. This was produced by the Swedish state television on April 28, 1945. This is actually a video. It's not a still, but the still was taken from the video, which is I watched it. Actually, Malka is moving, is waving her hand, and so this was documented, and that's where the image was drawn from. And if I may say a side comment, some of these images were used in the documentary Harbor of Hope, is produced by a Swedish documentary filmmaker, Magnus Gerten, and he created a website where he featured many of these images, and it was looking at this website that Rosa Nirenberg saw the two pictures were in which her mother was featured, and that's the story of the book cover.
Wow, that's amazing. I'm curious about the trajectory of this young woman. She's a teenager, and she comes, from this horrible experience. She comes to Buenos Aires. She's featured in this very public way on this stage in Luna Park with thousands of people. And how that character, maybe we think of her this way, how she appears in this book, which is not even attributed to her, that this is written by Mark Turkow, or Mark Turkow is the author. And I'll share that I came to know Malka's story because of the series that it inaugurated. This is the Das Polnische Judentum book series that Mark Turkow put out. And it was a major central location for post-Holocaust Yiddish writing, Yiddish literature, Holocaust testimony, but not only. And hers was the very first that inaugurated this whole series, and in many ways a genre itself of Holocaust writing. I wanted to share an excerpt from the very beginning of this book that I think sets it off in an interesting way. And I'm hoping we can talk a little bit about the gender and power relations between Mark Turkow and Malka Owsiany as they show up in the book. Mark Turkow writes in the beginning of his introduction, "It is strange after all. It seems as if everything that Malka Owsiany tells us we've already read in newspapers and books, in memoirs, and even in literature. Authors such as Shalom Asch, Joseph Opatoshu, Zalman Selglovich, H. Leivik, and the tragically murdered Yitzhak Katznelson, and many others describe it in their works. And yet, if you hear the description straight from a person who directly experienced it all, you are swept along, and it feels as if you yourself are experiencing it too. Malka Owsiany describes it to you so vividly, so naturally, and without any exaggeration. Besides, do you even need to exaggerate when the story itself is not more than a reflection of tragic reality?" And what has always struck me about this description here is the ways in which Mark Turkow references these great men of Yiddish letters, Shalom Asch, Opatoshu, Leivik, who are not Holocaust survivors. They're not writing Holocaust testimony. They're writing, they wrote fantastic works of literature. And he compares Malka's story to works that they might have written, yet she describes it to you so vividly, naturally, and without any exaggeration, which seems to me to say that she is sort of more naturally attuned to the story because she lived it, or there's something happening here with gender, with literature, and with this narrative that I'm not so certain about. And I'm wondering if we might comment on this. This is a question for Malena and for Sandra, but what are we to make of the gender and power relations in this book between the so-called author, Mark Turkow, and Malka Owsiany? And how do they show up in the book? Whose voice are we really hearing? Whose story is it? Yeah, maybe Malena, you might start us off because you were telling us a little bit about Turkow. So what do you think?
Yes, I agree that the comparison with these writers, it is a bit puzzling. But I feel the comparison is between these professional writers, what they tell about Jewish life in the Alterheim, and what it means to hear, to listen to a person telling. And I think this is the point. The main point about the book is this encounter between the survivor witness and the person willing to listen, and how the book is the result of this encounter and of the creation of certain conditions of listening, which enabled such a work to emerge and that wouldn't be repeated, because Mark Turkow did not interview other incoming survivors for the collection. This was the first and actually only time when he did. So from that respect, it is unique. And in regard to the gender power, well, of course, he was the author and he was a well-educated person and intellectual, and Malka had spent 6 years in captivity, and she always regretted the not having had the opportunity of having an education. So from my perspective, the main point about how gender power is featured in this work has to do with the knowledge. Who is the bearer of knowledge? One has the knowledge of the one who directly experienced, as it is written in this quotation, and the other one has all the possibility of contextualizing, of adding historical information and encyclopedic aspects of what is being told, and to shape the narrative. So for me, the aspect of, I would underline the aspect of knowledge. But probably Sandra has other perspectives about it.
Yeah, no, I think you get at a lot of important points. And I think in some ways what's happening here between Mark and Malka kind of preempts, I think, some of this conversation scholars have been having about these larger archives of Holocaust video testimony and the roles kind of the interviewers play in those as listeners and as kind of factors that really shape the narrative that emerges and the ways they do or don't listen or interrupt or kind of push forward a particular set of questionnaires. Of course, the situation here is a little different, right? We're in 1946, so we're like at the emergence of kind of even the concept of Holocaust memory, right? And there aren't as many kind of preset notions about what Holocaust memory like should or shouldn't look like. But of course, I'm sure these kind of particularly gender dynamics, which we also see sometimes in the video testimonies between, let's say, male interviewers and especially in this case, younger female interviewees, where they may or may not be comfortable discussing topics, let's say just gender topics or topics of, let's say sexual violence, which I know are kind of big silences in the Holocaust archives, are present. And also like, which I think hasn't become entirely clear from the excerpts we've shared, but really this entire testimony is written in the third person, which makes sense because like we were saying, Mark is the author and Malka is the interviewee. But it is, I think, in that sense, a little different from a lot of other Holocaust testimony that really kind of inhabits the first person narrative. So that's, I think, certainly makes it stand out in a couple of ways. And like also like we saw in the excerpt I shared, right? Mark is he's open about the fact that he is also an editor to some degree, right? He was listening, he was making choices about what to write down, about what to pack into the volume he ultimately created and what to leave out. And to some degree we'll never know what he left out, but also like I was saying, like I think Malena, I'm sure, has watched them. We have 2 pieces of video testimony also from Malka, which can serve as a complement to this. But in some ways, right, this type of written testimony and published in book form is more accessible because a lot of these kind of pieces of video Holocaust testimony are sometimes there's, questions of institutional access and, how do we even consume a piece of video Holocaust testimony versus how we are kind of, used to reading books. So I think those questions of format also come into play.
Sandra, as the translator of this edition, do you think of yourself as a mediator like Turkow?
I mean, certainly to some degree, and I know kind of in the contemporary translator community, especially when we're talking about literary translation, which this wasn't strictly speaking, there's kind of the trend toward placing the narrator as, kind of a writer in his own right, or like, the translator as a writer in his own right. I'm sorry, I misspoke there. And kind of having, really the translator is the one kind of finding a voice and a style in, let's say, the English in this case. Which, is I think true to some degree, but again, because this isn't kind of contemporary literary fiction we're translating here, it's quite a different situation. So I do think there's maybe some mediation going on, but I don't think it's as prominent. I think there's less of my kind of, maybe personal, stylistic inclinations or my personal thoughts of, style in English writing than we might see if it were a piece of literary fiction. I think it's the nonfiction aspect and the fact that it was already mediated by Mark Turkow, I think changes the dynamic, certainly.
Were there any moments of difficulty that you encountered translating a work of this content? The challenges of translating Holocaust material, or maybe there were linguistic things that were difficult. Can you tell us a little bit about your process?
Yes, sure. And we also have a little bit an image here, right, where we can see how I typically work. Yes, so this is the software I typically use for translating. So I like to go kind of have a parallel view side by side and to, be able to go over and make edits. And we saw here there was one line I had marked. The line I marked here in yellow, I think was something I wasn't quite happy with and was still thinking about. Um, and I think it's very close to the excerpt you ended up posting. So one kind of just technical element can always be a little difficult is just translating place names in Yiddish literature or in Yiddish documents because y for the most part, most places in Eastern Europe had a Yiddish name that differs to either a smaller or larger degree from the kind of Polish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian equivalent, and there's always a little bit of detective work involved in finding the contemporary equivalent, and also, of course, a choice. Like, when I'm translating a piece of Yiddish, do I want to use the Yiddish place name, or do I want to use maybe what is currently the place name so people could actually go like look up where this is or like learn more about the history of that place? Rosa was also quite helpful in that front. She did a little bit of work on the place names, and she was comparing what was happening in the Spanish edition, where I think those translators had already done some of that work. So I think we were able to kind of get at a pretty neat result there, and I think we settled on mostly using the contemporary, I think for the most part Polish in this case, place names, so people had a sense of where these would be on the map today. Otherwise, I think a general kind of for me, what is always strange when I translate Holocaust material is that first of all, you're going like rather slowly, right? Because you're translating, so you're really kind of dwelling and lingering in these, sentences or paragraphs that kind of describe very horrifying things. And so the slowing down kind of makes you linger there, but also the fact that you're kind of translating and just thinking about like syntax and words or like looking up a word makes you sometimes strangely distanced from it. Right? Like I've one translated something about the trucks that were used in Chmelno, the earlier versions of the gas chambers, and I was like, they were describing kind of, I think, the way the pipes were running and the way the gas was going back into the truck, and it was a little confusing. So I spent a lot of time just kind of looking at that and thinking about like, oh, how do I, what's the correct word for the pipe here? What is this word? And it's, something so horrific and inhumane and genocidal, and then you're just sitting there kind of, looking up a single word and pondering over a sentence. So to me, that's always rather strange when I'm translating Holocaust material more so than anything else. And right, it was kind of the same case here. Sometimes you would just kind of linger on a sentence or think about a comma or how you might want to rearrange something so it flows nicely in English, right? Again, kind of the question of like nice flow, but like a nice flow for something that's describing violence and inhumane conditions. There's a strange disconnect there for me often.
Can you tell us about how you came to translate the story? I understand something that's really fantastic about this edition, that doesn't exist in the Yiddish or even in the Spanish, is the story behind the story in a very explicit way. This edition includes a lovely and interesting piece about COVID and about how people in this family were reuniting over Zoom, and then there was an interest in reading this book in English. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about how you got involved with this project.
Yes, certainly. And I think maybe Rosa will have a little bit more to say on that front as well. But I was contacted by Rosa. I think it was kind of a, it was a bit of a telephone game. I think Rosa initially was in touch with the Paris Yiddish Center with, I think it's Naborski who runs it. And then he kind of forwarded it to one of my friends who was involved with the center at that time, who does a lot of translation work, but who was too preoccupied to take on a translation project of this size. And then she forwarded the thing to me. And again, like, right, this was kind of right during COVID, so it was a strange era for everyone involved. But I had some extra time on my hands. So I accepted this project and we worked, we worked long distance, we worked online exclusively. I would, kind of put together a couple of chapters here and there and send them to Rosa, who did a little bit of editing. I think she had another collaborator who helped her a little bit with editing before, she actually approached the press who ultimately published it. So we went back and forth like that, until I think we finished a product around 2020 or like mid 2020, 2022, I'm sorry, 2022. So we worked on and off for like 1.5, 2 years, I think, give or take, back and forth. And then Rosa kind of went on and tried to locate a publisher, which I know wasn't super straightforward either. So she put a lot of work in on that front before she kind of settled the deal with Cherry Orchard Press a while ago. And yeah, I met Rosa in person for the first time this February. So a couple of years after we kind of had concluded our work together, we actually met up, and that was very nice. Which was because it co-occurred more or less with the publication of the book. So that was a nice conclusion to this collaboration.
So I want to make sure to save some time for questions. And if you have any questions, please do share them with us in the Q&A function of Zoom here below. But before we sort of wrap up our formal discussion here, I do want to invite Rosa Nierenberg, Malka's daughter, to speak with us, to share a few words. I have some questions for Rosa, but also I want to give her an opportunity just to speak to everybody here. Is there, Julia, technically speaking, are we able to do that?
I don't know whether I am. Do you hear me now?
Oh, we hear you.
We hear you.
Okay, so I wanted just to thank Ivo for organizing this event, and Sandra and Malena, of course, that they've been helping me in any way. Malena, basically, without her, the book wouldn't have been here because she did most of the authorizations and stuff to make the translation going. And Sandra was right. The link came through Itzhak Niborski, just because we belong to the same Yiddish community in Argentina, and I didn't have any idea when I decided to do that. We just did it because our family members ask us. The fact that it's interesting by people like you, it's a double fargenigen. I have to say something in Yiddish, my mother would love it. But I want to say that my siblings are not with me, but they are in Toronto, the three of us, and she would be very happy also to know that all of us are together hearing about her.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Rosa. I was really surprised, but maybe I shouldn't be surprised to read about how the interest came from a grandson who wanted to read this story. And so that set off this initiative, I suppose, to find a translator and to make this book become available in English. And I'm curious to know how this book has brought the family together. I mean, you mentioned just now that the family is really spread out. And so this Malka's story, or having this legacy, is there something about it that has also, I don't know, had an effect on the family?
Well, the ask was not by a grandson, was by a second cousin that I've never met, actually. And it was right because COVID united us via Zoom on a family historical Hanukkah party that was started in Toronto. So my mother had family here in Toronto, and she was very proud, and she very loved that family. And so I was surprised that somebody wanted to read it, another Holocaust story, because they are all this, they're unique, but they're all the same, and they were all we had it in Spanish. All Malka's kids and grandkids and so far great grandkids speak Spanish. So I didn't feel the need of having it in English. But we couldn't say no because it overwhelmed us with motion that they wanted to know. It is a very wonderful family. My mother had 13, they were 13 siblings, and at that Hanukkah party, they were descendants of 7 or 8 of them. And so I don't think a book was required to unite that. We are pretty united from many, many countries, and that's why we wanted to do it. That's why we translated it. And as I said, the fact that it's interested by more people, that family, it's just great.
Well, thank you, Rosa. And I want to share, I plan on assigning this book to my class on Holocaust literature. I'm so glad that this book has been translated into English for my research and my teaching. And so I want to thank you. And of course, Sandra, for doing a really, really important job of doing the legwork on the translation, of course, and Malena for everything that you did as well to make this happen. We have a little bit of time now for some questions. I see we have a few in the Q&A. And I want to, let's see, we have sort of 2 categories here. The first might be something maybe for Rosa to answer from Jerry Austin. He asks, do we know much about Malka's early life, and are there other sources where that information can be found? He also asks, Owsiany means oats in Polish. It's true. I think a relatively rare Jewish surname and one more commonly known as a non-Jewish surname. Have you looked into Malka's genealogy? My father's surname was also Owsiany.
I know nothing about my Owsiany branch of the family. So we have, both of my parents were Holocaust survivors. I have idea of 2 of my grandparents, my mother's mothers and my father's father. I know nothing about Owsiany, unfortunately. And I tried to look once, but we have a big, the both families we know about, they're big and we are close on both sides. Nothing.
Well, maybe a future project for somebody somewhere. Thank you. Another question. The Spanish translation of Malka Owsiany Relata, contains a short epilogue by Malka's granddaughter, Anna, which was obviously not part of the original Yiddish edition. Is it included in the English translation? Sandra, maybe you could talk a little bit about the paratexts, the additional pieces that are in this edition. I wanted to highlight also the photographs that are in this edition, as well as I was really struck by a letter that was sent from an aunt, I believe, in Canada to Malka when she's in Sweden. What do we have here that's in addition to the story itself?
Yeah, so we have, of course, as we've mentioned, we have the preface by Malena, which gives us kind of historical and otherwise some context, some of which we got in this talk. There's also the Yiddish introduction, which was part of the original volume, which gives a little bit of a framing in terms of the kind of the series, this Polish Judentum, which Malena also talked a little bit about. We have pretty extensive inclusion of various family photographs, some of which we saw on our slides, but there are more in the book. And these were all, I think, put together by Rosa together with her family. There's a little bit of this epilogue we looked at by Mark Turkow. Again, that one is part of the original Yiddish. We have a set of acknowledgments by Rosa, which comes before some of these photos. And like you said, right, some of these photos had text on the back, which were translated. There is a letter from 1933 that was sent to Rakov, which was translated by Vivian Felsen. So yeah, there's another letter that was sent to Toronto in 1945, translated by Sharon Power. So we have a couple, right, a number of kind of different ephemera that really frame the story and give us a little bit a glimpse of kind of what came before and after 1939 and 1945.
Hmm.
And kind of where, how to situate this text in kind of a let's say 2026 North American context.
And I'll just add to this specific question. I don't believe that this epilogue from Anna is in the English edition, though there is a very interesting preface or something by the family and the story of the translation or the story of how it came about and what the import is. So I think, these three books together are well worth reading if you can do Spanish and Yiddish and English, and to see how this really builds on this one person's story, as well as there are the testimonies that are available in the Fortunoff archive and in the USC Shoah Foundation. And so I think Malena has a nice way of talking about it. You mentioned the afterlife of Malka Owsiany's story, and we really see that here as it gets fleshed out, of course, in all these different kinds of media with images and with ephemera. And it's not just the story she's telling to Turkow in the 40s, but really everything else that has come that adds to it, as well as pictures in the Spanish edition, I believe, where they go back to Poland and they go to Auschwitz, or in this edition, there are pictures on the airplane going back to Poland and seeing neighbors that she used to have when she was in Raków, when she was young. And so there are so many kind of nodes that branch out and make this quite an interesting document, I would say. A question for Malena. Referring to the question, whose voice are we reading in the testimony? Do you know if Turkow's original manuscripts have been preserved anywhere from his interviews with Malka, or if not manuscripts, maybe his stories as they were the serialized edition of the story, if it matches closely or if it departs? Can you talk to that a little bit?
The manuscript, no, I haven't seen any manuscript. The serialized text, yes, it is available in the National Library of Buenos Aires, and yes, it seems to be pretty. I haven't read the full. I haven't collected the full book in the serialized version, but it seemed to be close or the same as the book. But this is something that I can't affirm 100%.
I just wanted to add that, like, this, right, the kind of this early history of the text as a serialization, I think, still comes through, because as we saw, maybe as you see when you look at the table of contents, it's really relatively short chapters that are, somewhat work as standalone, kind of snippets and vignettes also, which again is something that I think we commonly see in Yiddish publishing.
Right,
Yes.
it's the feuilleton format that's how Yiddish readers first encounter this kind of text until it became a book.
Do you know if Malka, did she ever encounter any former Nazis while she lived in Argentina after the war?
I don't have any information about that.
No, I don't know about that.
But former Nazis were not like going around the street in every corner. It's not
Well, they
like
weren't announcing it, right? That's also right. It's complicated in Argentina after the war. Yeah. Well, if there are no further questions, I want to take this opportunity again to thank Malena, to thank Sandra, Rosa, Yivo, and the lovely folks who have helped us put this on. And I really look forward to using this text, and I appreciate very much the effort that has gone in to making it available. And Rosa is asking about a link to the recording, so I will let Julia take care of that. Thank you, Julia. And thank you all for coming to this event today. and I hope to see you at something in the future.